I was standing in my driveway when I saw the certified mail notice stuck to my front door, and my gut immediately told me this was going to ruin my week. The envelope from Pine Ridge Mountain Estates Homeowners Association felt heavy in my hands, the kind of heavy that has nothing to do with actual weight and everything to do with the bureaucratic nightmare I knew was inside. My name is Zachary Olsen, and I had just bought this beautiful mountain lodge in Breckenridge, Colorado 6 months ago, using every penny of my savings and a substantial loan to make my dream of owning a vacation rental property come true. The letter inside made my blood run cold. The HOA had placed a lien on my property for $23,000 in alleged violations and fines. I read through the itemized list with growing disbelief. Unauthorized exterior paint color, even though my lodge was the same cedar stain it had been for 30 years. Improper mailbox placement, despite the fact that I had never moved the mailbox from its original location. Excessive vehicle parking, which apparently meant the single work truck I kept in my driveway while I did renovations. Commercial activity without approval, referring to my vacation rental business that the previous owner had operated for a decade without issue. The list went on and on, each violation more absurd than the last. I immediately called the HOA office and got their answering machine. Of course, I left a detailed message explaining that these violations were completely fabricated and demanded a meeting. 3 days passed with no response, so I drove to the HOA office myself, a small building near the entrance of our mountain community that looked more like a garden shed than an administrative center. The woman behind the desk looked up at me with the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. Her nameplate read, Barbara Calloway, HOA President. She was probably in her mid-50s, with an asymmetrical blonde bob that looked expensive and a pantsuit that screamed middle management authority complex. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone suggested she would rather do anything else. "I'm Zachary Olsen. I own the lodge on Aspen View Drive. I received a lien notice that makes absolutely no sense. These violations are completely made up." Barbara's smile tightened. "Mr. Olsen, every violation on that list was documented by our compliance officer during multiple property inspections. If you disagree, you can file an appeal, but the lien stands until the fines are paid." Multiple inspections? I was never notified of any inspections, and half these violations are for things I have not even changed about the property. She pulled out a thick folder with my address printed on the tab. "We sent notices to your mailing address on file. It is not our fault if you do not check your mail." "I check my mail every single day. I never received anything until the lien notice." Barbara shrugged, a gesture so dismissive it made my jaw clench. "That sounds like a personal problem. The fines are legitimate, and they have been accumulating for 4 months. With late fees and interest, your balance is now $23,047. You have 30 days to pay, or we will proceed with foreclosure proceedings." "Foreclosure? Are you insane? You cannot just take someone's house over paint color complaints that are not even real." "I suggest you read your HOA bylaws, Mr. Olsen. You agreed to them when you purchased the property. We have every legal right to enforce our covenants. Good day." She turned back to her computer, clearly done with the conversation. I stood there for a moment, rage and disbelief warring inside me, before I turned and walked out. I was not going to let this stand. Back at my lodge, I pulled out every document from my closing. The HOA bylaws were 147 pages of dense legal text, but I started reading. What I discovered over the next several hours made me realize this was not just about violations. The HOA had extremely broad powers, but they also had very specific requirements for how they were supposed to enforce them. They needed to provide written notice at least 30 days before levying fines. They needed to allow property owners the opportunity to correct violations. They needed to hold a hearing if the owner disputed the charges. None of these things had happened. I also noticed something else in the bylaws. There was a section about personal liability for board members who acted outside their authority or engaged in willful misconduct. I started researching Colorado HOA law late into the night, taking notes and cross-referencing everything I found. By 3 in the morning, I had a plan. It was risky and probably a little crazy, but I was not about to let Barbara Calloway steal my property through fraudulent violations. If she wanted to play hardball with legal documents, I could do that too. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office in Summit County. I had printed out all the forms I needed and filled them out meticulously. I was filing a personal lien against Barbara Calloway for $10,000 in damages resulting from harassment, defamation, and abuse of authority. In Colorado, you can file a lien for various reasons, and while HOAs abuse this power constantly, individual citizens can use it too under specific circumstances. My basis was that Barbara had caused me direct financial harm through fraudulent claims and had damaged my rental business reputation through false accusations of code violations. The clerk processed my paperwork with a bored efficiency, stamped everything, and handed me my copies. "This will be recorded within 24 hours, she said. "The named party will receive notification by mail." "Perfect. Thank you." I walked out of that office feeling a mix of vindication and nervousness. I had just declared legal war on my HOA president, and I knew there would be consequences. But I also knew I was right, and I was not going to back down. 2 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered to hear Barbara's voice, except now it was not smooth and condescending. It was shaking with fury. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Mr. Olsen? You cannot file a lien against me personally." "Actually, I can. I just did. You will find all the legal justification in the filing. You caused me direct financial damages through fraudulent violations. I am well within my rights." "This is absurd. I will have my lawyer destroy you." "Great, have them call me. In the meantime, you have a lien on your credit report, just like I have one on my property. How does it feel?" She sputtered something incomprehensible and hung up. I allowed myself a small smile. Round one to me, but I knew this was just the beginning. I needed to build a real case if I was going to get that fraudulent lien removed from my property and protect myself from the inevitable retaliation. I started documenting everything. I took dozens of photos of my property from every angle, showing that everything was in compliance with reasonable community standards. I pulled up satellite images from Google Maps showing that my mailbox had not moved in years. I gathered testimonials from neighbors who had no issues with my property. I also started digging into Barbara's history as HOA president. I put a notice on the community Facebook page asking if anyone else had experienced similar issues with unfair violations. My inbox exploded within hours. Turns out, I was far from the only victim of Barbara's reign of terror. A woman named Rachel Chen, who lived 3 streets over, had been fined $15,000 for inappropriate landscaping when she planted native wildflowers instead of the approved grass species. An older couple had been threatened with foreclosure over a fence that had existed for 25 years but suddenly violated new interpretations of the bylaws. A young family had been cited for having a basketball hoop in their driveway during non-approved hours, which apparently meant any time Barbara felt like complaining about it. I started compiling all of these stories, collecting documentation, and building a pattern of abuse. This was not about one rogue lien. This was about systematic harassment, and I was going to expose it. 3 weeks after filing my lien, I received a summons. Barbara was suing me for defamation, harassment, and frivolous legal action. She was seeking $50,000 in damages plus attorney fees. Attached was a motion to have my lien removed as invalid. I needed a lawyer, and fast. I reached out to a firm in Denver that specialized in HOA disputes. The attorney I met with was named Sarah Wellington, a sharp woman in her 40s who had made a career out of fighting abusive homeowners associations. "Your case is interesting," she said after reviewing all my documentation. "The lien you filed is unconventional, but it is not entirely without merit. However, defending against her lawsuit and countering the HOA's actions is going to be expensive. Are you prepared for that?" "I do not have a choice. If I do not fight this, I lose my property." "How much are we talking?" "For full representation through trial, if it goes that far, probably $30,000 to $40,000. But I think we can settle this before it gets there. The HOA's lien is clearly improper. They did not follow their own procedures, and I can prove it. As for her personal lawsuit against you, that is more of a slap suit meant to intimidate you. We can probably get it dismissed." SLAP stood for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. Essentially, it was a lawsuit filed not to win but to drain the defendants' resources and scare them into submission. Several states had strong anti-SLAPP laws, but Colorado's were somewhat limited. "File whatever you need to file," I said. "I am not backing down." Sarah smiled. "Good. I like clients with backbone. Let me get to work." Over the next month, Sarah filed a response to Barbara's lawsuit and a formal challenge to the HOA's lien. She also filed a complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate, which oversees HOA management companies, documenting the pattern of abuse I had uncovered. Additionally, she sent a demand letter to the HOA's registered agent insisting they remove the fraudulent lien and cease all harassment or face a much larger lawsuit for damages. The HOA's response was to double down. They held an emergency board meeting, which I was not invited to, and voted to increase my fines for continued non-compliance and adversarial behavior toward the association. My total alleged debt was now $31,000. When I received that notice, I actually laughed. They were so far over the line that they were making my case for me. Sarah filed an emergency motion with the Summit County District Court to stay any foreclosure proceedings and to compel the HOA to hold a proper hearing on my violations. The judge granted it, which meant the HOA could not take any further action against my property until the hearing took place. The hearing was scheduled for 2 months out, which gave us time to prepare. Sarah subpoenaed all of the HOA's records related to my property and to every other property that had been cited for violations in the past 3 years. What we discovered was stunning. Barbara Calloway had become HOA president 4 years ago after a contentious election where only 8% of homeowners voted. Since taking office, she had levied over $2 million in fines against various homeowners. The average fine amount had increased by 300% under her leadership. And here was the kicker. Barbara's brother-in-law owned a property management company that the HOA had hired shortly after she took office. That company received a percentage of all collected fines as part of their compensation structure. It was a scam. Barbara was generating fake violations to pump up fine revenue, which directly benefited her family financially. And she had been getting away with it because most homeowners either paid the fines to avoid the hassle or simply sold their properties and left. "This is fraud," Sarah said when we reviewed the records. "This is not just a bad HOA president. This is criminal activity. We need to report this to the authorities." We filed a report with the Summit County District Attorney's Office, providing all of our evidence. They opened an investigation. Meanwhile, the hearing date arrived. It was held in the HOA's community room, which was packed with homeowners who had heard about the case and wanted to see what would happen. Barbara sat at a table in the front with 2 other board members and their attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who clearly thought he was going to steamroll a property owner who had gotten too uppity. Sarah and I sat across from them. The hearing was technically an internal HOA matter, but Sarah had insisted that a neutral mediator be present since the HOA had already demonstrated bias. The mediator was a retired judge who listened carefully as both sides presented their cases. The HOA's attorney went first, laying out all the alleged violations with accompanying photos. The problem was, their photos did not actually show violations. They showed a well-maintained mountain lodge with normal wear, consistent with a property in a harsh climate. Their paint color complaint was based on a single board that was slightly lighter than the others, probably due to sun exposure. Their mailbox complaint was based on it being 3 inches forward of the approved setback line, something they had apparently measured with a laser measure during one of their secret inspections. Their parking complaint was because my truck was visible from the street. It was all subjective nonsense designed to justify fines. When Sarah's turn came, she methodically destroyed every claim. She presented the HOA's own bylaws, showing they had not followed proper procedure. She presented testimony from the previous property owner, confirming that nothing about the exterior had changed. She presented satellite imagery proving the mailbox had never moved. She presented Colorado case law showing that reasonable vehicle parking on your own property cannot be prohibited by an HOA. She presented evidence of the financial arrangement between Barbara and the property management company. Then she dropped the real bomb. She presented evidence that Barbara had personally filed the violation reports against my property just days after I had declined to hire her brother-in-law's property management company to manage my vacation rental. There were emails proving that Barbara had reached out to me with an aggressive sales pitch, and when I politely declined, the violations started appearing. "This is not about community standards," Sarah told the mediator. "This is about retaliation and financial self-interest. Ms. Calloway has abused her position to target homeowners who do not comply with her demands, and she has profited from it." Barbara's face went red. Her attorney tried to object, but the mediator cut him off. "I have heard enough," the retired judge said. "The violations as presented lack merit and appear to have been filed without following proper procedure. The lien is invalid and must be removed immediately. Furthermore, I am recommending that the HOA board review Ms. Calloway's position as president, given the evidence of conflicts of interest." Barbara shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. I have dedicated years to this community." "Ms. Calloway, please sit down," the mediator said firmly. "My ruling stands. This hearing is concluded." We walked out of that room to scattered applause from the homeowners who had attended. Several of them came up to me afterward, thanking me for fighting back and asking how they could challenge their own unfair fines. But the victory was not complete. The HOA had to remove the lien, yes, but my personal lien against Barbara was still being challenged in court, and her lawsuit against me was still active. Plus, there was the criminal investigation, which was proceeding slowly through the district attorney's office. 2 weeks after the hearing, the HOA's attorney sent a settlement offer. They would remove their lien, dismiss their challenge to my personal lien if I agreed to withdraw it, and both sides would release all claims. It was a clean walkaway. I wanted to take it. I was tired, I was stressed, and I had already spent $15,000 on legal fees. But Sarah advised against it. "If you settle now, Barbara gets away with everything. She will just keep doing this to other people. The DA's investigation is progressing, and they have indicated they are considering charges. If we hold firm, we might actually see real consequences." I thought about all the homeowners who had reached out to me, who had shared their stories of being bullied and financially destroyed by this woman's greed and power trips. I thought about the young family who had almost lost their home over a basketball hoop. "No settlement," I said. "We see this through." Barbara's response was swift and vicious. She filed an ethics complaint against Sarah with the Colorado Bar Association, claiming Sarah had engaged in improper conduct during the hearing. It was completely baseless, but it was another pressure tactic. Sarah assured me she had dealt with far worse and was not concerned. Then things escalated in a way I had not expected. One evening in late September, as the aspen trees around my lodge were turning brilliant gold, I came home to find my front window smashed. Someone had thrown a rock through it with a note attached. "Drop the case or it gets worse." I called the Summit County Sheriff's Office immediately. A deputy came out, took a report, and collected the rock and note as evidence. When I told him about the ongoing dispute with the HOA, he made a note but said there was not much they could do without proof of who had thrown it. I installed security cameras that night, high-definition models covering every angle of my property. If someone came back, I would have them on video. 3 nights later, they did come back. At 2:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the cameras. I pulled up the app and watched in real time as a figure in dark clothing approached my truck with what looked like a baseball bat. I dialed 911 while simultaneously yelling out my window, "I have called the police and you are on camera." The figure froze, looked up at the camera, then sprinted back toward a car parked down the street. I could not see the license plate clearly, but I had footage of the person's build and clothing. More importantly, I had footage of them clearly intending to vandalize my property. The sheriff's deputies arrived within 10 minutes. I showed them the footage, and they promised to investigate. They increased patrols in my area and suggested I might want to stay somewhere else until the situation was resolved. I refused to be driven out of my own home. Instead, I sent the footage to Sarah, who immediately filed an emergency motion for a restraining order against Barbara Calloway, citing a pattern of escalating harassment and intimidation. The hearing for the restraining order was held 2 days later. Barbara showed up with her attorney, looking indignant. The judge reviewed the evidence, the fraudulent violations, the retaliatory lien, the vandalism attempts, the threatening note. "Ms. Calloway, can you account for your whereabouts on the nights in question?" the judge asked. "I was at home, Your Honor. I had nothing to do with any vandalism. This is just another attempt by Mr. Olsen to harass me." "Do you own a dark blue Subaru Outback?" the judge asked, referencing information from the investigation. Barbara hesitated. "Yes, but many people in this community drive similar vehicles." The sheriff's office ran the partial plate visible in the security footage. "It matches your vehicle registration." The color drained from Barbara's face. "That does not mean I was driving it. Someone could have borrowed my car." The judge was not impressed. "I am granting a temporary restraining order. Ms. Calloway, you are to have no contact with Mr. Olsen and are to stay at least 500 feet away from his property. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office as potential witness intimidation in an ongoing investigation." Barbara looked like she wanted to argue, but her attorney put a hand on her arm and shook his head. They left the courtroom in silence. I felt a wave of relief, but also a strange sadness. This whole situation was so unnecessary. All of this drama and legal warfare because one person could not handle a tiny amount of power without abusing it. The district attorney's office moved faster after the vandalism incidents. In early October, they filed criminal charges against Barbara Calloway for fraud, theft by deception, and witness intimidation. They also charged her brother-in-law with conspiracy and operating an unlicensed property management scheme. Apparently, his company had never actually been properly licensed with the state, which was a separate crime. The day the charges were announced, I got calls from at least a dozen homeowners in Pine Ridge Mountain Estates, all asking about how they could get their money back from the fraudulent fines they had paid. Sarah referred them to another attorney who was putting together a class action lawsuit against both Barbara and the HOA itself. My personal lien against Barbara was still on the books, though at this point it was mostly symbolic. She was going to have much bigger problems than my $10,000 claim. Still, I kept it there as a reminder that actions have consequences. The HOA held an emergency election in November. Barbara was forced to resign as president as a condition of her bail, and the board members who had supported her were recalled by an overwhelming vote of the homeowners. New leadership took over, and their first action was to hire a forensic accountant to review all of the HOA's finances and determine how much money had been improperly collected. The number was staggering. Over $800,000 in fraudulent fines over a 4-year period. The new board immediately began the process of issuing refunds to every homeowner who had been affected. Barbara's criminal trial was scheduled for March, but she took a plea deal in January. She pleaded guilty to fraud and theft charges, agreeing to pay full restitution to all affected homeowners and serve 18 months in county jail. Her brother-in-law took a similar deal. On a cold February morning, I received a check in the mail from the HOA for the full amount of the fraudulent fines they had claimed I owed, plus interest and my legal fees up to the point of the hearing. It was not everything I had spent fighting this battle, but it was significant. More importantly, I received a formal letter of apology from the new HOA board, acknowledging that I had been wrongly targeted and thanking me for exposing the corruption. They also passed new bylaws limiting the president's power, requiring greater transparency in violation reporting, and establishing a formal appeals process for homeowners. I finally felt like I could breathe again. My lodge was safe, my property was clear, and the nightmare was over. In March, I attended Barbara's sentencing hearing. I did not speak, but I wanted to be there to see the end of this story. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without the armor of her HOA president title. The judge was not sympathetic. "Ms. Calloway, you were given a position of trust within your community, and you exploited it for personal gain. You targeted vulnerable homeowners, caused immense stress and financial hardship, and when confronted, you escalated to criminal intimidation and vandalism. Your actions have damaged not just individuals, but the entire concept of community governance. I am sentencing you to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation, and you are ordered to pay $812,000 in restitution. Additionally, you are permanently barred from serving in any HOA leadership position in the state of Colorado. Barbara was led away in handcuffs. I felt no joy in watching it, just a sense of closure. Justice had been slow and expensive, but it had eventually arrived. As spring came to the Colorado mountains, I focused on rebuilding my vacation rental business. The publicity from the case had actually helped in an unexpected way. Articles about the HOA corruption scandal mentioned my lodge by name, and I got bookings from people who specifically wanted to support the guy who had stood up to the tyrannical HOA president. It was a strange silver lining. I also dropped my personal lien against Barbara. With her headed to jail and facing hundreds of thousands in restitution payments, my $10,000 claim was not going to be paid anyway. But it had served its purpose. It had gotten her attention, forced her to take me seriously, and bought me time to build my real case. Sometimes a symbolic gesture is enough. The new HOA board invited me to join a committee focused on revising the community bylaws to prevent future abuse. I agreed, figuring that getting involved was better than just complaining from the sidelines. We spent several months working on reforms, everything from term limits for board members to requirements for financial audits to strict procedural rules for how violations could be reported and enforced. The committee work was tedious but important. I met other homeowners who had their own horror stories, not just from our community, but from HOAs across Colorado. It seemed like Barbara's brand of petty tyranny was more common than I had realized. That was depressing but also motivating. If we could create a model for how to run an HOA properly, maybe other communities could learn from it. By summer, the new bylaws were complete and were ratified by a vote of the homeowners. Pine Ridge Mountain Estates became something of a test case for HOA reform in Colorado, and we even got contacted by state legislators who were considering new laws to regulate homeowners associations more strictly. I never thought I would become an HOA reform activist. 6 months earlier, I had just wanted to be left alone to run my vacation rental business in peace. But sometimes, life pushes you into roles you never expected, and you have to decide whether to step up or step back. I thought about all the people who had paid Barbara's fraudulent fines and just accepted it because fighting seemed too hard or too expensive. I thought about the families who had sold their homes and moved rather than deal with her harassment. I'd been lucky in some ways. I had the resources to hire a lawyer, the stubbornness to fight back, and the timing to catch Barbara before she could do permanent damage to my property. But the system should not require luck. Homeowners should not have to be wealthy or particularly brave to protect their property rights from abuse. That was the real lesson from this whole mess. One afternoon in July, I was sitting on my deck watching a thunderstorm roll across the mountains when my phone rang. It was Sarah Wellington, my attorney. "Hey, Zachary, I wanted to give you an update. The class action lawsuit against the HOA's insurance company settled today. Every homeowner who paid fraudulent fines is getting a full refund, plus 25% for damages and stress. You should see your check within 30 days. That's great news. What about the people who already got refunds from the HOA directly? They will get the 25% damages portion. The insurance company is covering everything since the HOA's policy included coverage for board member misconduct. Essentially, Barbara's actions triggered the policy limits. So everyone actually gets made whole. As close as you can get in these situations, the money does not undo the stress and time lost, but it is something." We talked for a few more minutes about some administrative details, then hung up. I sat there watching the storm, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief, definitely. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also a lingering frustration that it had taken so much time, money, and effort to stop one person from abusing a small amount of power. The rental season was busy that summer. I had guests coming and going every week, mostly families and couples looking to escape the heat of Denver and enjoy the mountains. Several of them asked about the HOA situation after reading articles online. I gave them the short version, and they always seemed impressed that I had fought back. "Most people would have just paid," one guest said, a lawyer from Texas. "The system counts on that. It counts on people being too tired or too scared to fight." I almost did not fight, I admitted. If the amount had been smaller, I probably would have paid just to make it go away. But $23,000? That was worth fighting for. The problem is that HOAs know that calculation, he said. They keep the fines just high enough to hurt, but just low enough that legal fees do not make sense. You got lucky that this woman was greedy enough to overreach. He was right. If Barbara had been more subtle, if she had kept the fines to a few $1,000s and spread them out over years, she probably would have gotten away with it indefinitely. Her downfall was her own greed and vindictiveness. As fall approached and the aspens turned gold again, marking a full year since the nightmare had started, I received a letter from one of the homeowners I had met during the committee work. Her name was Margaret, a retired teacher who had been fined $12,000 for unapproved landscaping changes when she had simply let her grass go dormant during a drought year to conserve water. The letter thanked me for fighting back and mentioned that she had used her refund money to finally take the trip to Ireland she had been postponing for years. "I never thought I would see that money again," she wrote. "You gave me hope that the system could work if someone was brave enough to push back." Thank you. I put the letter on my refrigerator where I would see it every day. It was a reminder of why the fight had mattered, even when it felt overwhelming and pointless. The criminal restitution payments were processed through the fall. Barbara was working in the county jail's kitchen program, earning a few dollars a day that went toward her restitution debt. At the rate she was going, she would be paying it off for the rest of her life. Her brother-in-law's property management company went bankrupt, and he ended up taking a job as a building inspector in Grand Junction, as far from Summit County as he could get while staying in Colorado. The HOA's insurance company paid out over $1 million total when everything was settled. It was one of the largest HOA misconduct settlements in Colorado history, and it got attention from the media and from lawmakers. In November, a state senator invited me to testify before a committee considering new HOA regulations. I drove down to Denver on a snowy Tuesday and spent 3 hours in the Capitol building, telling my story to a room full of legislators and their staffers. The problem is not HOAs themselves, I told them. The problem is that there's almost no oversight, and the people who are attracted to HOA leadership positions are often exactly the wrong people for the job. They are people who want power without accountability. We need mandatory training for HOA board members, regular audits, easier appeals processes, and real penalties for abuse. The committee seemed receptive, and I left feeling like maybe some good would come from this on a systemic level. A few months later, the legislature passed a new law requiring HOA board members to complete certification training, establishing a state ombudsman for HOA disputes, and creating a streamlined process for homeowners to challenge violations without hiring expensive lawyers. It was not perfect, but it was progress. By the time winter set in fully and my lodge was booked solid with ski season guests, I'd mostly moved on from the HOA drama. I still served on the community committee, but the day-to-day stress and anger had faded. My property was secure, my business was thriving, and the community had new leadership that actually seemed interested in serving homeowners rather than exploiting them. I ran into one of the former board members who had enabled Barbara at the grocery store one day. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, like he wanted to avoid eye contact and hurry past. Instead, I walked up to him. "Hey, Martin," I said. Hi, Zachary. Look, I just want to say I'm sorry about everything that happened. I should have pushed back more when Barbara started going after people. I just did not think it was my place to question her." "That was exactly the problem," I said, not unkindly. "Everyone thought it was not their place. But when you are on a board, it is your responsibility to provide oversight. Silence is endorsement." He nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "I know. I've been thinking about it a lot. For what it is worth, I've been trying to make it right. I've been volunteering with the new board to help homeowners understand their rights and the new processes. That is good. Keep doing that." We parted on decent terms. I did not hate him or the other board members who had gone along with Barbara's schemes. They were weak rather than malicious, which was its own kind of problem, but not one that required ongoing hostility. As the year turned and I found myself in January again, I reflected on everything that had happened. 14 months from receiving that first Lien notice to sitting in my lodge with my business successful and the HOA situation fully resolved. It had been the most stressful period of my life, but I had learned a lot. I learned that power unchecked will always be abused. I learned that fighting back is hard but necessary. I learned that the legal system, while slow and expensive, can eventually produce justice if you are persistent enough. I learned that one person standing up can inspire others to do the same. Most importantly, I learned that I was stronger than I thought I was. When I first got that lien notice, I was terrified. I thought I might lose everything I had worked for, but instead of crumbling, I fought back, and I won. The personal lien I had filed against Barbara, the seemingly crazy move that had started this whole chain of events, had been the right call. It had shown her that I was serious, that I was not going to be bullied into submission. It had bought me time and leverage to build my real case. And symbolically, it had shown that the weapons HOAs use against homeowners can be turned around and used against them when they act improperly. I still owned that beautiful mountain lodge on Aspen View Drive. I still ran my vacation rental business, now more successfully than ever. And I still lived in Pine Ridge Mountain Estates, but in a community that had learned hard lessons about governance and accountability. On a clear February evening, I stood on my deck watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. The snow was deep, the air was crisp, and my home was secure. I had fought for this peace, and I had earned it. My phone buzzed with a booking notification. A family from Kansas wanted to rent the lodge for a week in March. I confirmed the reservation and smiled. Life was good. The HOA's monthly newsletter arrived in my mailbox the next day. The new president had included a message about transparency and community values, along with detailed financial reports showing where every dollar was spent. It was a stark contrast to Barbara's reign, when finances were opaque and questioning them was met with hostility. I even attended the monthly HOA meetings now, something I never would have done before. They were actually productive, focused on real community issues like snow removal and maintaining common areas rather than on finding new ways to fine people for trivial violations. At one meeting in March, a new homeowner stood up and asked about the violation process, clearly nervous. The new president, a retired engineer named Robert, patiently explained the new system, written warnings with 30 days to cure, an appeal process, and fines only as a last resort for truly egregious violations. We are here to serve the community, not to punish people, Robert said. If you ever feel you are being treated unfairly, you have multiple avenues to appeal, and we take those appeals seriously. After the meeting, the new homeowner approached me. Are you Zachary Olsen, the guy who took on the old president? Yeah, that is me. I almost did not buy here when I heard about the HOA problems, but then I read about how it got resolved. You made this a place worth living. Thank you. It was strange being recognized for what had essentially been me defending my own property, but I appreciated the sentiment, and it drove home that the fight had been about more than just me. It had been about setting a precedent, showing that abusive HOAs can be stopped if people are willing to stand up to them. Spring came to the mountains in its dramatic way, snowmelt rushing down the streams and wildflowers erupting across the meadows. My rental calendar was completely booked through summer, and I was considering buying another property to expand my business. I was also approached by a producer from a streaming service who wanted to make a documentary about HOA abuse, using my story as one of the case studies. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to relive the whole nightmare, but Sarah convinced me it could help other people facing similar situations. We filmed interviews in April. It was surreal seeing the whole saga laid out chronologically, the fraudulent violations, the lien, my counter-lien, the hearing, the vandalism, the criminal charges, the settlement. When you are living through chaos, it is hard to see the narrative arc. But looking back, it was a clear story of corruption exposed and justice served. The documentary was released in June to positive reviews. My inbox flooded with messages from people across the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares, asking for advice. I tried to respond to as many as I could, always with the same basic message. Document everything, know your rights, do not be afraid to fight back, and find a good lawyer if you can afford one. Some of their stories made my situation look mild. HOAs, foreclosing on homes over a few $100s in fines. HOAs, banning American flags or restricting what colors people could paint their front doors. HOAs controlled by property management companies that existed solely to generate fee revenue. It was a systemic problem that went far beyond one corrupt president in one Colorado mountain community. But each fight against abuse made the next one easier. Every homeowner who stood up created precedent and encouraged others. Slowly, the balance of power was shifting. In August, I got an unexpected call from Barbara's attorney. She had finished her jail sentence and was on probation, and she wanted to apologize to me in person as part of her rehabilitation program. I was skeptical, but agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Breckenridge. She looked different than I remembered. Older, more worn down. Prison had not been kind to her, even a county jail for 18 months. She sat across from me with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, not quite making eye contact. "I do not expect you to forgive me," she started. "I just wanted to say that I am sorry. I let power go to my head, and I convinced myself that I was helping the community by enforcing standards. But really, I was just being cruel because I could. You did not deserve what I put you through, and neither did any of the others." I let her words sit for a moment. "Why did you do it? Was it really just about the money from your brother-in-law's company?" She shook her head. "That was part of it, but honestly, I think I just liked being important. I spent my whole career in middle management, never really having authority. Then I became HOA president, and suddenly I had power over people's homes, their biggest investments. It was intoxicating. I started seeing every little thing as a violation because it gave me a reason to exercise that power. You almost cost me everything," I said quietly. "My home, my business, my financial stability. Over nothing. I know, I will be paying for it for the rest of my life, literally and figuratively. The restitution payments will follow me forever. But more than that, I have to live with knowing I hurt people who trusted me to serve their community. That is worse than any jail time." We talked for another 20 minutes. I did not forgive her, not really, but I did come to see her as a cautionary tale rather than a monster. She was someone who let a little power corrupt her completely, and she destroyed her own life in the process. As I drove back to my lodge that afternoon, I thought about how many Barbaras there were out there in HOAs across America. People who got a taste of power and could not handle it responsibly. The only defense was vigilance, community involvement, and willingness to fight back when necessary. Fall came around again, marking 2 full years since the nightmare began. My business was thriving, the HOA was functioning properly, and I had even started dating someone I met through the community committee work. Her name was Rebecca Caldwell, and she had her own HOA horror story involving a dispute over solar panel installation. We bonded over our shared experience of fighting petty bureaucratic tyranny. Life had a funny way of turning disasters into opportunities. I would never have become involved in HOA reform if Barbara had not targeted me. I would never have met Rebecca. I would never have learned how strong I could be when pushed to my limits. The lien that had started everything, both the fraudulent one Barbara placed on my property and the retaliatory one I placed on hers, were just symbols of a larger battle between accountability and abuse of power. In the end, accountability won. It took time, money, and immense effort, but it won. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had just paid the initial $23,000 and let it go. I would still own my lodge, probably, but I would have been out the money and would have lived with the injustice. Barbara would have continued her schemes, victimizing more people. The HOA would not have reformed. The state would not have passed new regulations. One person standing up created ripples that spread far beyond their initial intent. That was the real power of fighting back, not just the personal victory, but the systemic change it could spark. As winter approached and snow began to fall on the mountains again, I sat in my lodge with Rebecca beside me, watching the fire crackle in the fireplace. The same lodge that had almost been taken from me by a corrupt HOA president was now secure, warm, and profitable. Justice had been slow and expensive, but it had been real. My phone buzzed with an email from Sarah Wellington. The Colorado Bar Association had dismissed the ethics complaint Barbara filed against her with prejudice and had issued a statement condemning the use of such complaints as intimidation tactics. Another small victory in the larger war against HOA abuse. I forwarded the email to Rebecca, who smiled and raised her wine glass. "To standing up to bullies," she said. "To standing up to bullies," I echoed, and we clinked glasses. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountains in white. Inside, I was home, truly home, in a place I had fought for and won. The battle with Barbara Calloway and the Pine Ridge Mountain Estates HOA was over. The scars remained, but so did the lessons and the victories. And if another HOA president ever tried to pull the same schemes, I knew exactly what to do. Document everything, know your rights, fight back strategically, and never let fear of the system prevent you from using that system to defend yourself. The personal line I had filed was unconventional, maybe even a little crazy, but it had worked. It had shown that homeowners were not powerless, that the tools used against them could be turned around. Most importantly, it had shown that one person standing up could inspire others, change systems, and achieve justice even when the odds seemed impossible. That was worth more than any amount of money, and it was a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and life went on in my mountain lodge. Hard-won peace, but peace nonetheless, and that was enough.